A warm welcome to a special edition of the Magpie Circle, in which we're going to try and shine a torch on the latest machinations of the National League, and who better, if he was a contestant on Mastermind, I'm pretty sure that this gentleman's specialist subject would be the National League. Ollie Bayliss, BBC correspondent in the South, and basically world's leading authority on National League and non-league football. Very welcome to the show, and thanks for trying to help us out by shedding some light on these things.
Oh no, it's my pleasure. I think if it were Mastermind, the general knowledge round would probably put me so far behind the other contenders that
well, it's probably all these hours you spend,
non-league.
Yeah, it's all these hours you spend on non-league. Look, let's get down to it. What, as you understand it, pray see it, give us a synopsis of where is the National League right now?
So, as I'm sure you know, and I'm sure your viewers know, 16 days ago, the league asked clubs, all 66 clubs, to vote on whether or not they think the season should come to an end. You can make it as simple as that. It is 4 separate resolutions, and it is all rather complex when you kind of dig into it. But fundamentally, it's whether or not they want the season to continue. And I think the majority of clubs in the National League, so the top tier of the National League, because the National League also encompasses all 3 divisions,
yes.
But yeah, the top tier of the National League, I think the majority of clubs at that level want to continue and are willing to continue in various ways, be it take out and use these loans from Sport England, or maybe the chairman are going to put their hands into their own pockets to fund them for the next couple of months. Maybe they've got some reserves. But I think the majority of clubs at that level are happy to continue. I think when you go a level below and look at the National League North and South, I think the majority of clubs at that level want to stop. And in fact, the majority of clubs have come out and spoken, and most of them have said which way they voted. And it looks like by a very slim majority, clubs at that level want to stop. Now, the problem is, for clubs at that level to have the right to end their own season, they first have to be part of this passing of resolution number 1, where it's heavily weighted towards clubs in the National League, the top tier, but basically it allows clubs to vote on the fate of their own tier, basically. So the idea of it, and it's a creation, I think, of the National League to allow the second tier to stop whilst the first tier can hopefully, in their eyes and in the eyes of many clubs, continue at that level. Where we are today is where we're waiting still on news on that. I think as soon as there's a majority in the various resolutions, the National League will call it and will announce it. They're not going to wait all 28 days for every single vote to come in. As soon as they can call it, it's like a general election, it's like US election. As soon as we know a result, they'll announce it, and then the National League North and South will stop, or the National League will stop if that's where the vote goes, or it will continue when we all know where we're going. I don't think they're going to wait all 28 days if they don't have to. But here we are 16 days on, and we're still waiting. So clearly clubs are taking their time about voting, or some of them are, because that's the only reason now we've got this delay.
Okay, so it was very interesting in the Notts County Kingsland commentary last night from the Walks, where the Kingsland owner, Stephen Cleeve, we've had him on as a guest on the show, like your good self. And to be fair, he spoke a lot of sense. So during the commentary last night, it's quite bizarre that a chairman commentates on the tactics and whether his centre-half's made a mistake or not. It's very, very bizarre. But anyway, he came out and said, point 1, there's already a majority of votes for the National League top tier to continue. And there's already a majority of votes for National League North and South to be null and void. They were kind of his first 2 points. He was then saying he thought that there were up to 5 National League top tier clubs who would not carry on. So as a result of the vote to continue, Dover have already come out and shown their colours. And he's saying there's another 4 teams potentially that will follow Dover's example and say, right, we're not playing. And Stephen Cleeve's view was he would accept that those records would be expunged and the remaining 18 teams or whatever would carry on and play to maintain the integrity of the National League, promotion, relegation from the tier. But clearly, this, I suspect, is done in the knowledge that National League North and South are null and void. So these teams that coincidentally are near the foot of the table cannot be relegated. How do you think potentially the National League view clubs copying, well, Dover and potentially other clubs copying this example?
It's going to be a big big problem for the National League to address potentially. And I think Stephen Cooks, I think his assumptions and what he's saying is probably going to be correct in that I think probably National League North and South will end as long as that Resolution 1 gets the 75% majority it needs. So I think he's right in saying that. I think therefore there won't be any relegation from the National League. I think that's probably, well, that will happen if National League North and South stop doing that. The number of clubs that are not willing to carry on, well, as you said, Dover have done that. Kingsland have said they voted against it. I presume he's not putting them in that bracket. Maybe he is. Wilston have said they voted.
I think he's putting himself in a bracket where he didn't commit to it. He said it took them less than 24 hours to vote against. I think the inference is Kingsland would not continue with the season. But I think he didn't come directly out and say that.
So I can see the difficulty the National League are going to get themselves into, because they have, to their credit, the board have given clubs the option to vote on this. They have listened to clubs and they've said, right, you can go away and vote. And if clubs don't then want to play games or can't play games because they haven't got the funding, and that's a separate issue, and I'm sure we'll get onto it, the funding, you can't blame these clubs for being in this position. You can't really blame Jim Parmenter and Dover for saying, well, we need to keep this club alive. You know, whatever penalty you want to throw at us, we need to keep this club alive. The options open to the league for clubs not playing games is, well, you can fine them. Well, that doesn't feel right, given these clubs are making this decision based on finances.
Agree.
If you dock them points, well, that feels irrelevant, because if you're docking them points, if they can't get relegated anyway, what's the purpose of that?
If I could just put in on that one, because I have a view on this. You know, I've worked in professional football for a long time, and ultimately points deductions are always a much bigger sanction than any fine. They always are, because you cannot quantify the value of points whenever you are competing in a football division where there is promotion and relegation. You know, you think of West Ham years ago fighting the points, get several £1 million fine. Kevin McCabe of Sheffield United took a private litigation action against West Ham, won however many tens of millions it was, but ultimately West Ham were relatively happy because they didn't have the points and stayed up. So is it conceivable, because I think this would certainly work, that the National League could dock, let us say, 10 points for any club in the National League not fulfilling the season, but start it next season? So so Dover, whoever else are on it, start next season on minus 10 points.
In a normal
maintains the integrity.
That's not. It's not a terrible suggestion in a normal season. If the clubs were not fancying playing football because they don't really want to, or because they know they can't be relegated and they'd rather save their money. But if you're a Dover Athletic, you can, I think, probably point at the league and say, well, hang on a minute. We started the season on the promise of grant funding throughout the season until we could get fans back. We started on those assumptions. We've had promises broken to us. We ran out of money because there's been this miscommunication between the league and the DCMS. So it's unfair, therefore, to dock us points. And that's the argument that the clubs in the National League North and South are making at the moment, saying, well, we're going to stop playing football. It's not our fault. We're trying to preserve what little finances we've got left at our football club, having spent 6-7 weeks paying out of our own pocket for January and half of February. We've run out of money, we're stopping. So it's not a simple sort of financial mismanagement case like we've seen with the likes of Macclesfield or, you know, clubs like that last season. They would dock points. And yeah, in normal times, it would make sense, wouldn't it, to take it through to next season, perhaps, because there's no relegation this season. The problem is, and it is going to be a problem with the league, who are charging all these clubs for not playing games at the moment, it's going to be handled by an independent board. But is it
independent ultimately?
And is any punishment fair? I don't know. This is the mess that we're in at the moment. Is it fair at all to expect clubs to play football, given what's happened, and given that really it's not their fault that we've had this pandemic? It's not their fault that they've been told to get on with the season. here we are now, and they've run out of money because they were led to believe they were going to get more funding throughout this period. It's a really difficult situation. However, you could argue that clubs, most of them could take on these loans. They could take on this debt to finish the season, and some clubs are willing to do that if they're up the other end of the table and have got their eyes on promotion. Some clubs are taking that approach, that it's worth taking on these loans if they can get promoted. It's very easy to see both sides of the argument, isn't it? And that's the problem. It's such a split.
I think one of the challenges the National League, certainly in the top tier, has is this is truly where semi-professional football meets elite level football. And by elite, I mean full-time professional football. You know, there are no clubs in the Football League that are not full-time professional. And clearly there is a substantial majority of clubs in the National League top tier who are fully professional. The Football League haven't said a great deal. But clearly, for me, this is part of the flip side to maintaining promotion and relegation throughout the footballing pyramid. That if you are a club, this is unfair and I don't mean it like this, but if you're a club that's rattling around tins and all the rest of it to keep yourself going, very commendable. But when you are in the top tier of the National League, every one of those clubs is aspiring to join the elite of football. And I think you have to have professional funding in place. And I think where, in the case of Dover, I think a lot of people find it difficult to have sympathy, is that the Dover chairman and owner was a representative on the National League board. And I'd like to ask you, what is your understanding of what went on with the whole grants, loans debate? Because we aren't getting really, on the one hand, why should we bother raking it over? It is what it is. But the other is, all of these things are a consequence for the way the National League has conducted itself. The chief executive has left the organisation. David Bernstein, a former FA chairman, a very high-ranking FA, like Brian Barwick, who still maintains the chairmanship of the National League. Where are we? What's happening? You, I believe, have a freedom of information request in, and what's the status of that to find out the minutes of this alleged meeting? Correct?
Yeah, and actually, it's a little bit broader than that as well. I've asked for the minutes, I've asked for every agenda, I've asked for every summary, I've asked for every email communication between a senior DCMS official, the FA, or the National League on the topic of funding.
And who have you made that request to?
To the DCMS, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport.
Right. Have you made that? Has that request been made to the National League as well? No,
because they're not a government body. They don't come under the same law that departments of the government come under in terms of freedom of information. So any person, you have to be a journalist, any citizen of this country, or in fact, I think anywhere in the world, you can put in a freedom of information request to the police, you can put one into your local council, you can put one into the government, in order to access certain information that should be public. So I've submitted that to the DCMS, still waiting on it. By law, they're supposed to reply by Friday. Your guess as to whether they do.
Okay, so potentially there is here a Friday deadline at which the details of this crucial meeting should be made public to you, correct?
That is correct, yes. There are certain reasons why they don't have to disclose it if they think that finding those details and sending them to me would cost more than £650 of public money, which I think equates to £25 an hour of somebody's labour. Realistically, finding the minutes of a meeting shouldn't be anywhere near that. That should be 3 clicks of a button. So by law, they're required to provide that by Friday. Now, whether they do is another question, and I remain a little bit sceptical on that. But they should be providing that to me by Friday.
Did the National League have a copy of those minutes?
So what we know about that meeting and those series of meetings is that the government have said they didn't promise grants at any point, and the National League have been unable to produce any evidence of the fact that grants were ever promised. There's a line in one of the government statements that says that. So I'm guessing they either don't have the minutes, or if they do have the minutes, it doesn't say grants.
Okay, you are obviously, I was going to say you've got a hotline. No one seems to have a particular hotline into the National League, but yours is probably a bit more lukewarm than most. What have the National League said to you about these meetings and minutes? Because presumably you've said, if you've got them, show them.
I mean, it should be said, I've got absolutely no hotline between myself and the National League. I'm picking at statements and quotes in the non-league paper like the rest of us, if I'm honest, when it comes to the National League. And I think that's part of the frustration that me and my colleagues have had, that actually nobody, it wouldn't have to be me. There are so many people interested in this story, but nobody in the National League has made themselves available for interview on this topic since the funding issue started back in October. Nobody has been able to have a back and forward and have any kind of sort of on the record chat with a spokesperson. Mark Ives is now.
Yes.
I've certainly put in a bit interview request. I've put in a bid. I know plenty of my colleagues have as well. Hopefully, when the resolutions are done and dusted, somebody is going to be able to, have a chat with him and ask about this. But my understanding would be that if they had anything in writing that proved that the government promised grants, we'd have seen that, or they'd have used that by this point, because at the moment, a lot of the finger of blame is being pointed at the league at this situation. If they had anything that they could hold the government to account on, I think they'd have produced it by now.
To the best of your knowledge, because this is a crucial issue, this meeting or series of meetings that took place, who was there from the National League?
I don't know. I think, and I gather, the FA negotiated the funding deal with the government on behalf of the National League. Now, I might be wrong about that, but I think it was between the FA and the government, most of that negotiation. However, it doesn't appear, and I've heard from plenty of people who have asked the National League about it and have had some form of off the record response. It doesn't sound like there were any minutes. It doesn't sound like anything was written down at this meeting, which I think is the most frustrating thing about this. We're talking about £11 million of public money. We're talking about 66, community football clubs, and a situation that's now unravelled to the point that we're talking about ending seasons and clubs withdrawing, all because this wasn't written down, this wasn't formally agreed anywhere. And parish councils will minute a meeting about a bench being moved 3 yards. Councils minute everything all the time, and here we are talking about a public body, a branch and arm of the government negotiating with a not-for-profit organisation like the FA or the National League Board, who are representing the 66 clubs. And nobody's written anything down. Nobody's agreed anything after the meeting. They haven't sent around an email saying, just to double check, this is what was agreed in the meeting. Signed. That is hugely frustrating, and that is where we are. And that's why we're at this point, isn't it? Because nobody seems to have actually made a definitive decision or communicated that back in October, September, November, whenever this was discussed.
Okay. Loans versus grants, you've kind of explained we don't know. What about the whole way, the initial set of grants were made? Because this clearly is also a major bone of contention among clubs, isn't it? And we've had the phrase coming from government, and the phrase that David Bernstein, in his report that still hasn't been made public, was referring to these monies were meant to be for loss of revenue streams. For a football club, clearly at these levels, substantial percentage of a revenue stream is going to be attendance, gate receipts. There's clearly going to be some hospitality as well, but a substantial part is going to be attendances. That wasn't how the money ended up being distributed. I mean, what have you been able to piece together about that whole debate?
I think it was certainly suggested that it would be used to cover lost gate receipts. Nothing I've seen, I might be right, nothing I've seen has ever categorically said that money was intended to completely line up with gate receipts. Now, that was always the suggestion. That would, in a lot of ways, have been a logical approach, because obviously clubs, to an extent, budget based on their income and their revenue, what they're expecting. However, I can also see the argument that when clubs were putting together budgets in June and July, no one was expecting thousands of fans to be allowed back into Notts County in October. We knew we were going into this, at best, looking at capacity crowds of 1,000, something like that over the summer. I don't think anybody in July was expecting 5,000 fans to be allowed back into each stadium come September, October, when the season started. So, to an extent, I think clubs would have and did budget for reduced attendances anyway. You can also throw on top of that, of course, that fans are still contributing through paying for streaming. You look at Barnet last night. Barnet said, well, we had 1,000 people pay for our stream last night. I don't know what Barnet charged for their stream, £6-7. You still made, it's not what they would have made by selling matchday tickets, of course it isn't, but they have made £6,000-7,000 from that stream last night. So clubs are, to a degree, still making some money. Season tickets haven't always been totally refunded. In some cases they've gone towards streams and things like that. So I have a lot of sympathy for the arguments of clubs like Dulwich Hamlet and Notts County and Hereford, who have clearly expected a bigger piece of the pie than they got. But I do also sort of see it from the other side of things, that clubs weren't necessarily expecting to have as many fans in as they would normally get. And if we flipped it on its head and looked at it in the Premier League, and maybe the Premier League had a big pot of money to spread out, would we be comfortable with Man United getting a massive chunk of that and West Brom getting a much smaller chunk of that because they have smaller attendances? Or would that feel a little bit like financial doping, and we're providing the bigger clubs who already are bigger with more money? I don't know. It's going to sound very, very sort of balanced of me on the fence, but I can also see both sides of it. What frustrates me, finally, is that the National League came up with a system, and lots of people quite rightly had some gripes against it. They then commissioned an independent report to look at it. They commissioned that, no doubt paid for that. I don't know what they paid for that, but that wouldn't be done for free. There's 6-7 individuals involved in doing that. They looked at it. They said, you've got the model wrong. This is what we think. And the league, having paid for that report, have then dismissed it and promised to share it with all interested parties. Back at the end of December, start of January, the league put out a statement. They said, we will share this report with all interested parties. And, well, I'm an interested party, you're an interested party, the clubs are an interested party. And here we are, we still don't have the finer details of that report. A summary was sent to clubs, but not the actual nitty-gritty of the actual finances they recommended.
I mean, David Bernstein, who I know from my company, handled all the Vauxhall sponsorships of the 4 home nations for 5 years. Quite unusual for him to go public before Christmas. Born out of, it would seem, frustration that, having, as you just said, commissioned the report, it was kind of like put away in the bottom drawer, to gather a bit of dust. And clearly, David is not without influence in government circles. As a former FA chairman, that's part of his job. And I think it not unreasonable to assume that that the government has taken a very dim view of having allocated that £11 million. Say, hang on a minute, potentially we're not very happy with this. And I think that has possibly set in chain a sequence of events that have now made it much more difficult for National League clubs. One point I'd like to ask you is that the government has also said that it would, I hope I'm getting this right, look on cases of individual hardship with clubs, recognising the community aspect of clubs, and look at grants on a, you need to present your case, Mr. So-and-so at Club Y, and we're not ruling out, we'll look at a grant. Stephen Cleave, and I'm sorry we're sort of clutching at straws here and there, but this, the Dover guy doesn't seem to have volunteered a great deal of information on this one either. According to Stephen Cleave in the commentary last night, there was very little likelihood of any club getting a grant. Now, are the government speaking with forked tongue? Do we have any more light on how many of the National League North and South clubs have applied for these grants? Because my understanding would be you have to show your books. Yeah, government is going to look much more stringently at making a case for a grant. Any thoughts or learnings that you've heard about?
It all feels so late in the day, doesn't it? I think is my first concern with it. Yeah, you're right. The government have said they've said no club will go to the wall if they can't take out loans. Grants are there for those most in need. Yeah. Well, I would say Dover appear to be one of those then that most in need. If Dover are saying we financially cannot afford to finish the season, then in theory they would be a good candidate for this. Now, from what I understand, there's another meeting on Friday between Sport England and some clubs, and then hopefully by next week they're going to find out. But this is funding that was supposed to cover the January payroll. This was funding that clubs needed mid-January at the latest in order to pay their monthly weekly wages in January. And clubs have already voted to end the season or to carry on based on hope of, expectation of not getting grants, I suppose. But they've had to make this decision over the last couple of weeks. Really, they'd have made this decision with all this full knowledge in mind of knowing whether each individual club was going to get a grant to run. If I'm a chairman, I want to know if I'm getting a grant to see me through to the end of the season, fine, I can vote to continue. If I'm not, then I have to look twice at it. Unfortunately, clubs aren't going to get that information until probably next week at the earliest, at which point the season at step 2 is probably going to be made null and void, and step 1, chairman have had to stop the season or voted to continue the season. It's all so late in the day, isn't it? It's all so last minute. This is a winter survival fund that was announced in the middle of November, and here we are now. We're going to be touching on the start of March before clubs even know what share of it they're going to get. I think that is the biggest frustration in my mind, anyway.
What in your estimation is going to happen? Is the existing National League board structure fit for purpose anymore? Because one thing I would agree with Jim Parmenter from Dover was he said the board was now basically not fit for purpose, didn't have the respect of its clubs. Now, I would caveat that by saying he's been a significant part in the erosion of respect, and has, as an executive member, been party to a lot more information than most, and has to take some element of responsibility for the position that the league finds itself in.
I mean, the league itself, when they appointed Mark Ives as interim general manager back in December, said that he was going to come in and they were going to look at their own leadership structure. So I think that in itself is an acknowledgement that the National League feel that they need to look again at how the league is being run and their own structure, and who heads things up and how it works, I guess, within their own internal management system. This wouldn't have been easy, I don't think, for anybody to run any football league during this point, or for the FA or for those involved. I think in football administration, it's been a nightmare 12 months. We do appear to be at the point now where clubs are taking decisions into their own hands and taking matters into their own hands, don't we? If we look at what's happening, especially in the National League North and South Chester today, for example, Spennymoor have done it, Dulwich Hamlet, but, clubs that just said, we're not going to play, we're stopping playing. I mean, the original 2-week suspension of those leagues came because 14 clubs issued a joint statement and said, yeah, we don't want to play anymore. So that, I feel like, it's a telling sign, isn't it? I suppose it's a worrying sign if I'm part of the National League board, if clubs are continually just taking matters into their own hands and doing what they think as opposed to what they're told. Now, in some respects, it's good that clubs are being listened to. It's good that clubs called for a suspension of the league. That did happen. They said we can't afford to carry on, and the league have said, fine, here you go, here's a vote to end the season right now. Legally they have to give clubs 28 days. That isn't something that the league are doing for the fun of it. They have to give clubs 28 days. It has to be this complicated 4 resolutions because they need that first resolution to allow clubs then to vote on the fate of their own tier, which I think probably seems like a sensible approach. So to an extent, actually, clubs appear to be being listened to more than maybe they were over the summer. But it is a worrying sign, isn't it, that clubs are just having to do what they think is best for the future of their club and not listening to the league anymore in some circumstances.
But surely, to protect the integrity of the whole Football League pyramid, promotion, relegation, because it would be very easy if I am the Football League to say, the National League, you are our only official feeder league, and 2 places exchange. Yeah, we're full-time pro. Some of your clubs are full-time pro. Others are semi-professional. Right? We expect that the clubs that you are going to push into this league are properly run professional clubs. Right? And if you're going to start doing things your own way and abandoning seasons and up to 5, let's just take one club's just suddenly going to say, we're not going to play any more games. Tough. Yeah? That wouldn't be allowed to happen, as you well know, in the Football League. If it was, the club would just be relegated. 3 points per game not fulfilled, bang, 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 bang. So you've got this kind of like river, haven't you, that comes into the sea. It's got to have a certain level of professionalism. And there has to be a concern that the Football League said, well, why should we have 2 automatic places every year? You can't run it properly. You can't. And each and every member of the National League, certainly in the National Division, has to kind of embrace it. Because you can't keep banging on, we want more clubs to get promoted and all the rest of it. You've got to demonstrate that you can run a club properly and the league can be run properly and professionally. And, this whole issue of loans and grants and not one official statement from the National League board. Where's Brian Barwick? Where's Mark Ives having a press conference with you? All the questions you and I are bouncing around, they can answer 70% of them. And then we're not speculating. Fair play to Stephen Cleave in his commentary last night. He's volunteered more from a person in a position of authority at one of its member clubs than 99% the league have done at all during any of these processes. And that, I think, is that the National League is making a big rod for its own back.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you're saying there is accurate. If we look over the course of the summer, making decisions about points for games and things like that, the EFL generally would have a meeting amongst its clubs and would issue a statement half an hour after that meeting saying what had been discussed, what the next process was. Rick Parry was on TalkSport every other day, talking through it, and it's a huge amount of back and forth with the EFL. We knew exactly what every club was proposing. There was a huge amount of transparency. COVID testing, for example, the EFL and the Premier League and the Women's Super League and Championship, the FA, every week they put out 1, if not 2 statements, depending on what they're testing, saying how many individuals have they tested, how many have tested positive. Now, the National League did that all through the playoffs. Not a single statement was put out in terms of the numbers of testing and how many tested positive. We're now starting natural flow testing in the National League eventually this week. Are we going to see a weekly step? I would like to see one. I don't think that. I think a lot of us journalists wouldn't we? I think things like that. It is quite frustrating that I don't think Brian Barwick has done a live interview with anybody since April. I might be wrong, and hands up if I'm wrong about that. I don't think there's been a live interview done with anybody since April, since it started. So yeah, definitely there's questions I think we all want to ask of the league. And again, to caveat it, yes, it is a really difficult time for people running football, and they can't get together in boardrooms. They're having to do everything remotely. It has been like a season, like none other. I totally take that point of view, and this has not been easy. I don't think there is an ideal solution out of this, but I think a little bit more accountability, I think, would be nice. It would be nice to be able to ask questions of those making the decisions. I think because we can't, I think clubs are then taking matters into their own hands and issuing their own statements and offering out their own information. Your other point about how it looks to the EFL is definitely something that was concerning the league over the summer with points per game. They were very keen to follow a similar model to the EFL, to wait for the EFL to make a decision before they made a decision, because they felt if they followed a similar model to the EFL then couldn't refuse them promotion places. because whatever you do, there must be good for us. Definitely, at the moment, the optics of how it looks, if they were to continue a season that 6 clubs were to, stop playing and have to have those results expunged, and it's sort of a mini league for promotion. Yeah, absolutely. How that looks to the EFL, and whether the EFL are still willing to accept 2 clubs to be promoted and 2 clubs from the EFL to be relegated, it's definitely something that should be concerning the National League. I mean, if we look at last summer, the EFL were very keen to say with Macclesfield, we'll only relegate you if we believe that the National League is going to start on time and there is going to be a properly run league for us to relegate you into. So certainly they're not going to see 2 of their member clubs relegated into a league that doesn't look like it's going to start properly next season or only has 16 teams left in it. It's definitely going to be something that it's concerning the National League, which is why I'd imagine they're making this cut and dry decision, this vote. And then if the league is going to continue, then they would expect every club to continue. And if Dover don't, I think they're probably then going to have to work out what they do about that. I think their expectation is going to be that everybody should continue to participate in the leagues that have voted to continue.
I think that unless there is a points deduction implemented for the following season, then I can see Dover not fulfilling those fixtures, and I can see well, if you're doing it, we're going to do it. And I think that's probably the single biggest challenge at a National League level, as in the main top tier, that the league have got. Because, I don't know, let's say 4 or 5 say, right, we're not playing anymore. Okay, 18 teams, you've got less division, less matches to play, so you'll get them all in. It's a 30 game, it's a 34 game season rather than 46, whatever it is. You get it in, you get your 2 clubs. Okay, and I can see that being a compromise. But what happens with the clubs that then 4 or 5 games into that lose all 4, so they can't get an edge in the playoff, and think, well, why should we incur debt? We'll just drop out as well now. There's no sanctions against those other teams for basically, it depends how you spin this. They're basically taking the ball home. Well, we don't like this decision. We don't like the collective decision of the National League, National Tier. So we're taking our ball home. And we'll play the card about we're a community club, we haven't got the money, and all the rest of it. The reality, whichever way you cut it, is that there's no club in the top 6 or 7 will be voting to end the season. Okay? There won't be. So I think that's a big challenge. And this gets back to, does the National League board and executive, is it able to keep control of its members?
Yeah, I think you're right that clubs are obviously voting based on where they are and their prospects of promotion. But to be honest, I can understand that point of view. If I'm a chairman and the grant money has run out and I have to look at it and think, do I spend £400,000, £500,000 of my own money to see through to the end of the season, having had promises in my mind broken over how the season is going to be funded? But if I'm 4th and I've got a chance of automatic promotion or promotion up to the Football League, then I'd probably think, okay, maybe that is money well spent. If I'm down the other end, I'm probably thinking, well, no, I was promised there'll be funding through this season to support us when we don't have fans back. My fans aren't back. Why should I spend £500,000 of my own money to finish the season where there's no penalty for relegation anyway?
But the government, Ollie, are claiming no club's going to go to the wall. There is grant aid for clubs that can genuinely present a case. Now, this point seems to be very largely being glossed over by all those clubs.
But there is, £40 million of it left now. They've given 10 million to steps 3 to 6 across all sports. 15% of it is available in grants. So somewhere, you tell me a club that does, without having to dip into its reserves or into its chairman's pocket, that has got the funding to just keep paying players without funding. I don't know where they're drawing the line and how they're judging it, and I don't think clubs do either, because no club yet has been assured of grants. And the problem is they're voting on these resolutions now. So as hopeful as they might be that they're going to get grant funding in 2 weeks' time or a promise of that, at the moment they're having to make a decision based on the fact they haven't got grants. And that's the problem that we're in now, is it's all happened the wrong way around. Clubs are being asked to vote and being asked to make decisions now without knowing. Had this been sorted out in November and clubs have been able to go into January knowing if they had a grant or a loan, then clubs could have planned going forward. Then Dover wouldn't have had to have spent 7 weeks worth of money, to keep the club going during this time when they haven't had any grants. Had they, applied for grants and had that funding in place for January, they might not be in this position now. The problem is it's all just come too late, isn't it?
Agreed. You and I both know that across all levels of football, community clubs fundamentally will always rely on an individual benefactor. Okay? I know of virtually no non-league club that operates on a break-even basis without support from a benefactor or owner. They all tend to pay out not insubstantial wages to clubs not significantly down the pyramid. So none of them ever have, if I'm being brutally honest, none of them have great business models anyway. They all rely on an individual to pump money in for whatever purpose, to support that club, whatever. And then the money that comes in from supporters or from, booster clubs and all those is a relatively small amount compared to the owner has to write the big check out. There aren't many proper business models throughout football. I
think that the problem is we're not often privy to it, are we? We're not often privy to exactly how it breaks down. But I think clubs like Hereford, like Chester, like Dulwich Hamlet, I think there are clubs like that probably do get the sort of crowds and the sort of money in through the turnstile. That means I don't think clubs like Hereford are propped up by big business owners anymore. I think that that is a community club and that is part of their concern over taking on these loans, because they don't know how they're going to be able to pay them back. It's part of their kind of constitution that they're not supposed to get themselves into debt. They're supposed to live within their means. I agree with you that the sort of higher up the pyramid you go, the more it appears to be backed by rich owners. I think certainly when you're looking at step 2 and below that, there are non-league clubs that live very hand to mouth, but live based on using the money that comes through the turnstile to pay the players. The problem is this pandemic has kind of flipped that on their head, and clubs that were reliant on doing that previously are now the ones that are struggling, and the clubs that were relying on rich owners before, when that previously wasn't seen as a great way of running a football club, now are doing all right.
Okay, what about the alternative view that, and Tunbridge Angels, I believe, have gone down this route? They've basically just gone out and recruited what would potentially be deemed as lower level players, basically playing for nothing. Or in the case of a Dover, which is an inverted commas professionally run club, why don't you just play the youth team to maintain the integrity of the competition?
Yeah, clubs are looking at doing that. They've furloughed their entire first team in order to play the kids, haven't they? Or to play players they can recruit for nothing, basically, and to not have to pay them a wage. The problem with that is it starts to skew the integrity of the league pretty quickly, doesn't it? Okay,
let's compare and contrast. I either take my ball home, I'm not going to play my remaining 22 fixtures, or I'm going to put a team out to the best of my ability.
And that's what some clubs are doing. Whether Dover and Jim Parviser has said he thinks that ruins the integrity of the league and he doesn't want to do that, because you can see both. You can see both approaches. I mean, credit to these clubs that have scrambled around and assembled a squad of 16 players that want to play for free. I don't know what standard those squads are going to be. At last minute, these are players who presumably probably would have been playing at step 3 and step 4 where the season's ended, and they would rather play than not play, even if it's for nothing.
Possible showcase gives them a chance. Put a 17-year-old in, someone else, a Chesterfield or Notts County. I'll say he's a bloody good lad. I think you can always get a team out. I accept the point about integrity, but only partially. Because the alternative is just not to play your games. Well, that's got to damage the integrity of the competition more.
If you were going for promotion and you'd already played one game against the team that was bottom of the table, and so you're drawn, and then at this point the team that's bottom of the table decides that they're gonna, play 16-year-olds in order to get through to the end of the season, and your promotion rival has 2 games against them, you're going to be a little bit frustrated that they're potentially going to get an easy 6 points, whereas you drop points to them earlier on in the season. So you can see clubs' frustration potentially, at the integrity of the competitiveness of the season going that way. However, is that a better option than that club withdrawing and fine all points against them, therefore are removed and expunged, and we end up with a table with only 19 teams in it left? I don't know. I think probably clubs finding a way to finish the season whatever way they can is probably better than clubs fully withdrawing. I think I probably agree with you, but I don't think either is ideal.
There we absolutely agree. There are precedents or examples in the Football League down the years of clubs where they haven't been able to play their professionals, and then they've had to field their youth teams to complete the season, or there's 2 pros left and 9 under-18s to fulfill the fixtures. I cannot, I can think of many examples of that happening. I can't think of too many examples where clubs just decided to fold after 12 games or 16 games or 20 games. And even if that club then has folded or refused to play on, there is a sanction against them, isn't there? They're kicked out of the league, they lose the golden share, they disband, bury altogether. Yeah, harsh, but they know the rules. And I think if you're the Football League, you're kind of looking at the National League and saying, well, hang on, if you're going to supply 2 clubs into our division every year, we expect a certain standard. And I think then it is commensurate on each individual club within the National League, certainly at National League top tier, to buy into that. Because otherwise, okay, we won't bother having 2 places anymore. We might just do 1 now. Oh, no, you can't do that. Or, in fact, we'll pull the drawbridge up. And you and I both know that if you're the big clubs, inverted commas, you've probably already sounded out the Football League. What's the situation here? I don't see it getting very far because you're only going to dilute the 72 clubs' wealth and income and all the rest of it. But if Dover are going to do their own thing and not accept the decision, why should the clubs at the other end?
But it all comes back to, doesn't it, that these clubs started the season being told you were going to get grant funding for every month that fans weren't back, that the season was going to be funded that way. To compare to the EFL, the government eventually forced the Premier League to give £50 million to League One and League Two clubs. Well, the National League would gladly have £50 million and would happily finish the season. Have £50 million being handed out to the 3 divisions in the National League, not like the 2 divisions in the EFL, then great. I don't think we'd be having this problem, would we? It's only that the money has run out, and the clubs did live by the rules. They would argue they lived by the rules that they were going to get this funding until such a point where the fans have come back, and those rules have been changed on the mid-season.
Yeah, and we get back to the minutes. But once that decision was made, I think there is an obligation for the clubs to fulfil it. I get to an extent National League North and South, but my argument would be if you want to carry on and continue, then you should be rewarded for that. So if 10 teams drop out, it's radical, okay? It's radical, okay? It's a 10-team division, National League South, right? Because then you are giving somebody a reward for trying to play football, yeah? And also, my personal view, if National League South or National League North continued in any unabridged format, they won't. But if they did, I'll be as sure as eggs is eggs. There won't be 4 or 5 teams saying we're not going to bother finishing the season in the National League North, because then there would be promotion and relegation.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen, because I think these
agreed
are quite clear cut as to what will happen. Yeah, you're right. We need to be rewarding. None of us want to see a situation where leagues are null and void. No one involved in football wants that. Leagues don't want that. Leagues are set up to, help clubs play football and to organise games of football. And in the National League's case, find clubs that can be promoted to the EFL. That's what they want to do. Nobody wants a null and void situation. I don't think the FA and I don't think clubs wanted it, last season for parts of non-league where it happened. The frustration is that this situation has come about because, and again, it does all come back to those minutes. It comes back to that agreement. Why that agreement wasn't in place really in September before they started the season. I think it was meetings that happened in October and November, wasn't it? Really,
yeah.
That needed to happen before the season started because it was basically a late Thursday night email ahead of season starting on a Saturday where the league said, don't worry, funding is sorted. Here's some assurances. We'll be all right. And clubs sort of took that at its word and started. And now they're left high and dry without the funding that they thought they were going to get and the funding that they'd planned for.
Ollie, I'm just thinking, I hope I haven't sounded hard on you. It's kind of just the old journalist in me, and that you know more about this than anyone else I've spoken to. And so it's genuinely educational for me, and I think also for everyone listening and watching, to try to understand more. Because one of the single biggest issues with all of this has been the vacuum. It's been a massive vacuum coming out of National League towers somewhere in Birmingham. Nothing. And so it's sad that, a small club will have a big part. Say, oh, well, Notts County have got millions in the bank. Stockport have got £1 million in the bank. And Stockport and Notts will be saying, well, look, you're a small little club. You're playing in the big league. Yeah, you might not think it is, but it's a heck of a lot bigger up the pyramid ladder than clubs further down in step 6, 7, 8. There's a commensurate responsibility. And I agree with you. A lot of it is unfair, but this complete lack of leadership, coordination, organisation, call it what you will, from the league has led to all of this. And sadly, I think it's going to get pretty murky in the next week or two.
The problem's going to be when a decision is made, there is going to be a large minority of clubs that are going to disagree with it. So if the National League North and South is made null and void, which probably looks more likely than not, there's going to be 15 clubs that are going to be really frustrated about that, and then are going to argue that maybe we should start a mini league or maybe we should do something else. And I'm not sure that's going to happen, but no. There's going to be clubs that are going to be frustrated the same way as in the National League. If the top tier step 1 carries on, you're going to see clubs like Dover, like Kingsland, like Wilston, that are going to be frustrated about that, and that are going to maybe try and take their own course of action as Dover have done, or are going to certainly. It's all become quite public, hasn't it, in terms of statements, and everybody is, and I think that's brilliant. It's been really interesting. It's great to see clubs speaking their mind and showing what they think, but you could argue it shouldn't have to come to that. And I think we're going to see more of that. Yeah, I don't think this is going to end this week or next week when we find out the resolutions.
Ollie, you've been absolutely fantastic. I know that certainly huge swathes of the Notts County fan base are subscribed to your extensive Twitter account. Thank you ever so much for taking the time to talk to us. I still think it's going to be tricky times, like you, for a week or two. I just hope we can get to a point where we can maintain the integrity of the football pyramid, and so that in future, Football League don't take sanctions against the National League. Yeah. And I think beyond that, you can't hope for any more. And then there has to be, I think, some form of proper reset in the summer, because the National League cannot afford to start next season in this half-cocked manner that it appears to have gone into next season. And I think it's very, very, very difficult for the existing infrastructure at the National League to stay in office. I really, really do. I think it's very, very difficult.
What I would like to see over the summer is a plan put in place so that if we end up with these seasons curtailed again the way that we have, you look at the whole of non-league, in fact, steps 3 to 6 going through this process again now of what do we do, the season hasn't finished. We need a hard and fast rule. We need to stop doing this every year. We need to stop having these conversations, because hopefully COVID will go away. But if it happens again and we have another flurry next winter, we have to stop games and we get to 70% of games played, something like that. Do we do points per game? We need hard and fast emergency scenario rules that allow for either clubs to withdraw due to certain circumstances, or we go on points per game, or a certain clause where, in the EFL, where they said the majority of clubs want to stop a season, then that season is stopped. And I think if it's 75% complete, then it's points per game. you know, non-league really needs some hard and fast rules over this summer so that going forward we know where we are. We can't keep doing this every year where we're trying to work out how we solve seasons that can't resume or are being suspended.
Ollie, on that note, thank you very, very much indeed for your time. I'm sure this will be very eagerly watched and listened to. And we eagerly await, hopefully, a tweet from you revealing all about these meeting minutes from your FOI request.
Yeah, I fingers crossed. They've got until Friday legally to respond. Otherwise, I'm sure I'll be escalating it if they don't. But yeah, fingers crossed.
Hey, we wish you every success, and thank you, Ollie, on behalf of all football clubs outside the professional football pyramid, for shining a light on this and doing your best to educate us as best as you can.
Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I try my best. There is always two sides to these discussions, if not for, you know, when we look at the funding situation and things like that and how the money was allocated between all clubs, it's very easy to see multiple sides of arguments. And yeah, I try my best to be as fair and balanced as possible to it all. So I hope that's come across.
Thank you very much indeed, Ollie.
My pleasure.